say a quick Happy Father's Day. As a dad myself, it's an honor to be part of a community where there are so many men who take seriously their role as dads and as husbands, or just generally as guys who are figuring out how to follow Jesus. And I know it's kind of tradition, right? You come to church on Mother's Day and it's all about how great moms are, and you come to church on Father's Day and it's all about getting ripped a new one, right? That's kind of how it usually plays out. But we're not going to do any of that today. Because sincerely, I am grateful for so many of you that serve as such great examples of what it is to be dads. And we got a couple jerks, but for the most part, so, okay, there's more than a couple. No, I'm just kidding. There's so many great examples, and sincerely thank you. As another guy who's simply trying to figure out how to live as a follower of Jesus, I am thankful for your example, and so keep it up, and honored to be part of that. So, now, as I proceed, I wasn't saying that just to butter you up. I want to ask you not to judge me for what I'm about to say. I love reality TV shows. I do. If I'm flipping through the channels, I will skate right past a drama. I've never watched an NCIS, whatever city it is, in my entire life, right? A Law and Order back when that was. I never watched any of those shows. Sitcoms, take it or leave it. I couldn't care less. But if I'm flipping through a show through the channels and I find a good reality show, odds are I'm going to stop at least for a little while, right? There's just something about it. Especially travel shows, cooking shows. I love that stuff. Amazing Race. If I could be on any show, it'd be Amazing Race. So if anyone wants to go on with me, let's talk. That would be great fun, right? My wife won't go on with me, but which may give you a window into what our life's like. But Top Chef. I just want to eat. I don't want to cook. I just want to eat what they make, right? Deadliest Catch. I love these shows, right? There are some, though, that go a little farther than I'm ready for. Like, for instance, many of you have heard the show Naked and Afraid, right? I've never watched Naked and Afraid, mostly because I'm scared it's going to remind me too much of my honeymoon, all right? That's why I don't want to watch Naked and Afraid. Anyway. I didn't just say that. You misheard me. You misunderstood what I said. There is a new show, though, that I've recently discovered that I've fallen in love with. It's one of my new favorites. Maybe some of you have seen it. It's called Alone. Have you seen this show, Alone, on History Channel? Here's the basic premise of it. Man, I'd never heard of this until just a couple of weeks ago and went back and watched the first season. It's now in its second season, partway through. Here's the basic premise. The producers of the show, they take 10 people. This season, there's some men and women that are mixed into the bunch, and they take them to a remote section of Vancouver Island, BC. And they drop them off several miles apart from each other, completely alone. And they're allowed to take some very basic survival tools of their choosing, just a handful of things. They are given a set of cameras, and some charging equipment, some solar charging equipment, so that they can document their experience. And then they have zero contact with human beings. And the goal is to survive and stay as long as you can. They have a satellite phone that at any moment they can tap out and call for the rescue boat to come get them. And the one who lasts the longest wins $500,000, all right? And so you watch this whole thing unfold, and it's fascinating. Because initially, of course, all they're thinking about and working on are the basic survival necessities, right? They're looking for a source of food. They have gill nets and stuff like that to try to fish. They're looking for fresh sources of water. They're looking for building themselves the shelter that's needed to protect themselves. Several contestants, because this is a very wild area, have had very close encounters with a variety of animals, predators, bears especially, we've seen several times on the show. One guy this season only lasted 5 hours before he tapped out. And the guy who won the first season lasted 56 days, all by himself, no contact with any other people, completely depending on himself. Now, these people aren't just like random off the street like me. These are skilled survival people, all right? Many of them are wilderness trainers. They've done many former military people, amazing backgrounds, and they build some unbelievable complexes. There's one guy who's built this massive cabin that's got separate rooms for the food area to try to protect from predators coming, and sweat lodges and all kinds of, several of them have built boats where they can now go out. This is all just by hand. They built boats that they can go out into into the water and fish, a little deeper waters, stuff like this. But once they get past those initial stages of figuring out their basic needs to survive, the game shifts from being a physical one to being a mental one. Because no matter how tough they are, and these guys are tough, ladies included, of course, no matter how experienced or skilled they are at wilderness living, several have quit for the simple reason that they couldn't handle being alone. They missed people. They missed interaction so much that they were willing to give up the chance at $500,000 just because they couldn't take it anymore. In fact, one of the early favorites, as my family's been watching this show, is a guy named Randy. And in a recent episode, a little spoiler alert for those that are going to be watching it, 28-year-old guy named Randy had built this amazing cabin with like elevated bed area and all kinds of crazy stuff. On day 21, he simply couldn't take it anymore. And he called in for rescue. In fact, that's a picture of him right there. He's waiting for the boat in that scene. And here's some of what's a voiceover in this scene. He says, "You can have the greatest life in the world, but if you're alone, what's the point? Physically," he said, "I felt capable of staying out here a really long time, but we're not just physical bodies. I wasn't being fed mentally," he said. "I wasn't being fed emotionally because there's no interaction with other people. Don't get me wrong, I love living this way, but there's no way I could do this alone." And then he said this, "I have been craving human companionship like it's water." No matter how tough these guys are, and they're tough. I mean, look at this guy's beard, right? It's amazing. It's amazing. They realize they need more than just food and water and shelter. They need other people. And you don't have to go through an experiment anywhere near that dramatic to discover all you got to do is live a little, right? And pretty soon, if you're honest, you begin to discover the same thing. We all understand this need for others because with others in our lives, the sweet joys are twice as sweet. And with others in our lives, the burdens and challenges of life, they're half as heavy. Whoever you are, whatever your quest, you cannot do it alone. Just think of all the stories that are some of our favorites in culture and movies. It's about groups of often unlikely people coming together to fulfill a quest. Those are the stories that we return to again and again and again. And as we come to the end of this Rooted series that we've been in the last several weeks, we're learning here about this letter to the Colossians written by the Apostle Paul, this early leader in the Jesus movement who is encouraging and trying to help train these churches that are just getting off the ground. One of them in a city called Colossae. This man, the Apostle Paul, who I think everyone would agree, believe in what he believed or not, he is certainly on the short list of people who have most significantly influenced the world as we see it today. The Apostle Paul. Even he couldn't do it alone. We're rooted together. In fact, that's what we're going to talk about for the minutes that we have together today. We're rooted together. And if you have a Bible, we're going to finish up Colossians. Go ahead and turn there. We'll put it on the screen, several passages as well. But it's Colossians chapter 4. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. If you get into 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, hang a left. You'll just get back to Colossians, all right? Chapter 4. While you're looking that up, as I said, we're finishing this series called Rooted. And Jonathan's been helping us. Jonathan and Jake and I suppose have been trying to help us figure out what it means to dig our roots deep into Jesus. What it takes to stand tall when the winds and the storms hit our lives, and how we can grow in ways we never dreamt we could. Now, many of you, Jonathan did his undergraduate degree in horticulture, so he has been having a field day with this Rooted series, right? And even though he's away now on his sabbatical, I'm going to do my best little channeling of Jonathan here and give you a little bit of lesson from nature. I won't do it as technically as he does, and it may be completely wrong, but he's away for a long time, so we're all right. Several years ago, Lori and I went and visited Redwood National Park. Have you been in Redwoods? How many of you have been in Redwoods National Park? Oh, so many. Is it unbelievable? I mean, you see the pictures, even the ones with like the tree carved out and the car driving through it, or we did that obligatory shot as well. But even having seen all the pictures and videos, nothing prepares you for that experience of walking through these groves of trees that go higher than you can see. Unbelievable. And when we were there, we're one of those geeky people that actually listens to the ranger talks. We figure we get our tax dollars out of it, you know what I mean? So we listened to these little presentations, and the guy was talking about how it is that these trees can grow so tall. I mean, higher than 350 feet, some of the tallest, 24 feet across diameter, massive. And yet, as tall as they go and as fat as they are, their roots only go like 6 to 10 feet deep into the ground. That's it. It defies all logic. It physically shouldn't work that these trees could stand as tall as they are, especially with even a little breeze. But the secret, the ranger explained, is that these roots, as they spread out, they not only begin to weave into each other, but they actually begin to grow together. So that in some sense, it isn't just a bunch of trees whose roots are interwoven, it's beginning to grow to become one organism. Each of these individual trees growing together as one organism, sharing resources, relying on each other, this interdependence that allows them to grow in a way that no other living thing on earth can grow. The scale and size of these unbelievable things. And they endure. This interwoven root system allows them to endure unlike almost anything else on planet Earth. These trees are some of the oldest things on our planet. Estimates from experts. You get what I'm saying, right? These people who know a lot about this, they say, they say some of these trees are 2,000 years old. These trees, they were growing when Jesus was walking on this planet. That's how old these things are. Now, why do they last so long and grow so tall? It's simple, because they're rooted together. And you see where I'm going with this. If you want to endure, and don't we all want to endure? We don't want to cave at the slightest breeze. And if you want to grow, and don't we all want to grow? Don't we recognize that this stagnation and sometimes rot that can come in when we're not growing, that's not what we want in our lives? No matter our age, no matter our season, no matter who we are, we want to stretch. We want to continue to grow. If you want to do these things, in fact, if you want to grow to levels that you never even dreamed were humanly possible, you will only get there if you're rooted together. So who are you rooted with? How much thought do you give it? What are some essential characters to have in that grove of trees in which you're growing right now? So as Paul wraps up this letter, we see him talking about this. We get a window into the reality of this in his life. And so he finishes this letter, as he does so many of his other letters, within what many ways is a sort of list of crew and cast for his life. It's kind of like the credits at the end of some of these letters. You know that list of people that are scrolling up the screen as you leave the movie theater? It's the people who played a role in what you just watched, in the big ways, like the executive producer, or the director, or the leading actors, or in the small ways, like the best boy, or the key grip. How do you get to be a best boy, right? Do you go to school for that? Or the gaffer. These all play a part in making the movie what it is. See, Paul, in this section, is giving a window into the credits of his life, the people who play a role. Now, I'll be honest with you, in my own Bible reading, as I'm reading through a text, I often come to sections like this, and I just sort of skim through them, little truth be told. I kind of treat them like the credits. I don't really pay attention. I kind of skim through them. It's like those long lists of names that you sometimes hit in other spots in the Bible, these genealogies, right? So-and-so begat so-and-so, or he was the father of so-and-so, and on it goes. I tend to skip down through those until I stop seeing names I can't pronounce, right? And then I dig back in. But in many of Paul's letters, he finishes them talking about some of these people. And when you actually learn about these people, I don't think I've ever actually studied this section before. I just kind of glaze over it. But when you begin to look at these people, when you begin to discover what it is that we know about them, and some we know nothing about, others we know a great deal about, you begin to see what kind of people did Paul associate himself with, and how did Paul become Paul because of the trees that were around him. So let's start walking through this in a little bit of time that we have together this morning. Colossians chapter 4, beginning in verse 7. And as we start this, let me just say, This is one of those passages where I wish that God would just change everyone's name to Bill. All right? Something like that. He could have done it, but for whatever reason, he didn't. So if you happen to be Greek or maybe the distant descendant of one of these people, do not be offended if I butcher their names. All right? So here we go. Colossians chapter 4, we'll start in verse 7. Tychicus will tell you all the news about me, Paul says. He is a dear brother, a faithful minister and fellow servant in the Lord. I am sending him to you for the express purpose that you may know about our circumstances and that he may encourage your hearts. Let's just pause here for a second. Here we meet Tychicus, or Tychicus, or Tychicus, or whatever it might be. And Paul has good things to say about this guy. In fact, he uses words to describe him that are similar only to ways that he described other important figures like Timothy, who is Paul's, of course, most famous protege. And we read in other spots in the New Testament, specifically in Acts, that Paul and Tychicus had worked together a good bit. In fact, he was a part of gathering this offering that when Paul was traveling, he realized the people back in Jerusalem were struggling, and he invited the Gentile, non-Jewish churches to pull some resources together to help support and meet their needs, this generosity in the early church. And Tychicus' job was to give these folks at Colossae an update on what's happening with Paul, because they were worried. What is he doing in prison? How is he doing? But then, this important last line, it says there, he was sent to encourage the others. Here's the thing. If you want to stand tall, if you're going to weather the storms that will come into your life, you need friends who are encouragers. You've got to be intentional about finding people who are not constantly cynical, not constantly pointing out the wrong in everyone and everything, but who are instead looking for the good, who are searching for ways to call that good out, even in you. Isn't it easy to get kind of wrapped up in that kind of cynical spiral that sometimes happens? This would never happen in church, but hypothetically, right? A decision's made, something happens you don't agree with. Isn't it easy to start spiraling down into that kind of cynical, critical spirit? That's not Tychicus. Tychicus is there as an encourager. And I need those kind of people, because I don't know about you, but what I've discovered in this life, it is hard to follow Jesus in our world sometimes. It's hard. Holding on to him in a world that is swirling a million different ways, so many voices, figuring out how to keep my roots anchored in what very often feels like sand instead of solid dirt, earth. In our culture, with our political world and all that kind of stuff, that could be hard. And I am forever grateful for people who, in my story, have just been encouragers. I've told many of you about this before. I keep a folder in my office that I call my smile file, all right? And on those days, when I'm thinking about how wonderful it would be to be a barista at Starbucks, I pull out my smile file and am reminded of faces and stories and experiences, people, some of whom gave me notes, no kidding, 25 years ago, but that I would never let go. And I pull them back out, and I read them, and I'm reminded, don't quit. Keep going. You never know. One more step. Keep going, keep going, keep going. I need that. You need that. So who do you have like that? Or let me take it another direction. Not just who's doing this for you. Is there anybody for whom you're doing this? That you're that kind of encourager? Because I think we way underestimate the importance of this. There are times when all you need to hear is don't quit. Keep going. I know it's horrible. Keep going. In fact, maybe the very reason some of you are here today is for this moment right now. Because you need to hear this. Don't give up. As frustrated as you are, as discouraged as you are, don't cave to that temptation that seems to be offering what you crave so deeply. Don't abandon your faith because of the pressure or what seems unpopular. Don't give up on your kids. Don't give up on your spouse because it's hard and it seems like quitting would be so much easier. Keep going. Keep going. Another day. You can do it. You need an encouraging friend, and you need to be that encouraging friend for somebody. Paul goes on, verse 9. Here we meet another character. It says, Tychicus is coming with Onesimus, our faithful and dear brother, who is one of you. They will tell you everything that is happening here. So the two guys that Paul has flagged to actually deliver this message, his Pony Express, are Tychicus and Onesimus. And we know a bit about Tychicus, but we know even more about Onesimus. Onesimus comes from a radically different background than Paul. In fact, there's another letter in the New Testament that tells us a great deal about his life. See, Paul, his background, he'd been trained at some of the very best theological schools of the day, the rabbinical schools of the day. Some of the most famous teachers and theologians of his time had been his professors. He had come from a family of some social standing. He was a Roman citizen, and that was a fairly big deal in that world. And he obviously had well-connected friends from what we learn of his experience prior to becoming a follower of Jesus. So here we have this relatively upper-class, super-educated, privileged guy who's associating himself with this Onesimus, who we know from other parts of the New Testament is a runaway slave. He's most likely uneducated. He's a man on the run. You see, he had escaped slavery, and somehow he had heard Paul preaching about Jesus, and it transformed his life. This guy who was trying to escape, with good reason, the abuse of his past, he discovered a whole new beginning, a new start, a kind of freedom he never even dreamed about through Christ. And it changed his life. Now, Onesimus used to be owned by a man, a slaveholder, named Philemon. And any of you that know anything about the New Testament, that may be a name that rings a bell, because there's a letter in the New Testament called Philemon. It's a letter written from Paul to Philemon, asking Philemon to receive Onesimus back, not as a slave to be punished, but as a brother to be loved, to be welcomed in. I mean, this, even historically, Philemon is a huge letter, historically, because it's one of the first advocacies for the abolition of, for the end of slavery, for slaves being restored to proper standing in society. It's a landmark, earth-shattering letter. Huge deal, right? So Onesimus is an interesting guy because he comes from a completely different perspective. And let me talk about this for a second. We all need, at times, friends who come from different perspectives, who have different backgrounds. Sometimes we need people who see the world a little differently than we do because they help us understand. They keep us from falling prey to the caricatures that are often portrayed in our world of what people who don't think like us actually are. You know what I'm saying? For years when I lived in Cincinnati, prior to moving here, we were in Cincinnati for 6 years. And every month for several years, I met with two pastors for lunch once a month. One was a well-regarded, respected guy, a community organizer, who worked in the church in the center city of Cincinnati, or university area of the city, who, if you asked him, he would tell you Bernie Sanders is too conservative for him, all right? Give you some sense for his politics. Then the flip side, the other guy, long-time pastor in the area, hugely respected guy, grateful for the time I had with him. And if you would have asked him, he would have told you Rush Limbaugh was too liberal, all right? So here he would sit at this little Thai restaurant in Clifton, district of Cincinnati, once a month, and we would talk about the issues in our world, about our ministries and how we address social challenges and what we try to call people to and so forth. And it was such a beautiful experience of radically different perspectives that in our world, nobody could, oh no, those people shouldn't associate, right? They couldn't possibly be friends. But there was a kinship, there was a camaraderie, a respect, that we could talk about these different perspectives. I learned so much during those few years. To not caricature or simplify those I disagreed with, but to begin to understand, how did they get there? What is it that we value? How can we find common ground? It's a powerful, powerful thing. Because here's what I've found. It can be very dangerous to only ever hang out with people who see everything just like you do. It really can. To become monochromatic in terms of how you see the world. To instead begin to see into hearts and understand perspectives that may be different than your own. Doesn't mean you're going to agree. It just means you're seeking to understand. Maybe for Paul, this is the role that Onesimus played. Highly educated rabbi, escaped slave with no education at all. And somehow God linked them together, only in the kingdom of God. I love that. Oh, I love that. Now, another person. Aristarchus. Aristarchus, yes, there you go, Aristarchus. Verse 10. My fellow prisoner Aristarchus sends you his greetings, as does Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. You have received instructions about him. If he comes to you, welcome him. We only get this brief reference to this Aristarchus, but let me say a little bit about him because we actually know a good deal about his story as well. Aristarchus is the kind of friend we all need. He's the kind of friend that endures. Through good, bad, thick, thin, Aristarchus sticks by Paul. And man, they went through some bad. There's a scene in Acts 19 where Paul is preaching in a city called Ephesus. Later, the letter Ephesians was written to that city. They're speaking about Jesus and a riot breaks out. It's a long story, but there's this riot that breaks out coming after these Christians. They want Paul's blood. But somehow Paul escapes. And since they can't find Paul, guess who they grab instead? Aristarchus. Aristarchus is dragged into this arena and he's beaten within inches of his life. He barely escapes. And yet, even having gone through that, his faith stood firm. Because later we see his name again, this time in Acts 27, when the Bible tells us that Paul, on his way to Rome, is in a shipwreck. And who is with him on the boat? Aristarchus, this friend who endures. He calls him his fellow prisoner. You see, Aristarchus isn't being sent with this letter. Why? Because he's a prisoner right there with Paul. He's the guy who stuck by through thick and thin to the very end of Paul's life. There's this beautiful proverb, Proverbs 17, that says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Those kinds of friends that don't bail when it gets tough. Those kinds of friends that you know can be trusted when everyone else runs away, they're there. They can help you see your blind spots. There's a loyalty through the good, the bad, the ugly. Now, naturally, we all want those kinds of friends, but let me ask you, are you that kind of friend? I mean, when things get rough, do you suddenly vanish? Or are you there with a call, there with a text, there with some help? Hey, man, I'm so sorry what you're going through right now, but I want you to know I'm willing to go through it with you. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it means. But if there is anything you need, day or night, you call me and I will be there. You can count on me. It's an enduring friend, and we need him. We need him. Do you have that friend? Maybe you do. Thank them. Maybe today it's just a note while you're doing your Father's Day call or email or whatever. Maybe it's just a note. Hey, today they were talking about friends that endure in church, and your name came to my mind. I'm just grateful for your friendship. Guys can do this for each other. It's cool, right? Dude, I'm glad. I have a friend recently, I sent him a note for his birthday. I said, man, I'm glad you were born. My life's better because you were born. So thanks. That's just something simple. It means a lot. Other names. I'll mention another one here real quick. It's actually in that same verse. You see it quickly referenced. It talks about Mark. You see it there, the cousin of Barnabas. This is another name that we know a little something about, and this story is a little more sketch. Back in Acts 15, Paul and Mark, or John Mark, as he's referred to in other places, they have a falling out. Turns out that Mark isn't that kind of enduring friend, and during a difficult season, he bails. He goes home. He can't tough it out. And Paul wasn't happy about it. In fact, he and his ministry partner, Barnabas, these guys had started together. Barnabas had been the guy who initially introduced Paul into the Christian community after he'd been led to Christ. They had a falling out. They parted company over this. That's how serious this conflict was. Sometimes people have this idea that we Christians, we're all just going to hold hands and skip through fields together. It doesn't happen like that. Sometimes there's conflict. Sometimes there's collision, and this is certainly one of those cases. But here's what's so rich about this little scene that we get at the tail end of Colossians. It appears whatever that different disagreement had been, that somehow there'd been healing. Somehow things had been patched up. Somehow they didn't give up on that relationship, but instead they leaned in. They worked through the issues, and they were reconciled together. Do you have friends like that you've been reconciled with? People who, for whatever reason, maybe have crossed you, broken a confidence, or maybe you did it to them, whether it was an intentional thing or whether it was accidental. A sense of betrayal that instead of saying, well, fine, I'm done with that person, instead you say, you know what, that hurt. But I still want to figure this out. Or for you to come and say, I know I did that, and I'm sorry, and I want to figure this out. You know what I've learned in my friendships, even in my marriage? That sometimes intimacy, real connection and bonding, it comes working through that kind of stuff. Figuring out how to reconcile even when things have been strained. Do you have any friends right now where you need to do some reconciling? Maybe it's a phone call. Somebody that played such a key role in your life, but maybe there was one careless word or some careless thing that happened. And you need to reach out and say, hey, I don't want to rehash everything that happened, but I just want you to know I miss you. And whatever happened, I'm sure I played parts of it. I'm so sorry. I wonder if we can figure out how to put this thing back together again. You go there, it'll lead to some of the greatest growth in your life. That's the kind of stuff that allows the trees to grow high. Several more people we just don't have time to talk about. You keep going, you see a guy named Epaphras. There's this beautiful assessment of Epaphras, this guy who wrestles in prayer for these people. Do you have somebody that prays for you? Do you know when we write down those prayer requests on those connection cards, do you know that we have teams of people who pray by name for you? Do you have other people in your life that are praying? Do you have people you're praying for? That reassurance, that confidence that comes with knowing someone's praying for you, it's a priceless gift. We could go on and on. There's actually a guy named Demas in this story that later we find out he actually abandons the faith. It's a sad story, but at this point, Paul's still endorsing him. But here's this guy who seems to be struggling in some way, and over in Timothy it tells that he walked away. These things happen in our lives. But I want to ask you, as you think through your friends, do you have these kinds of friends in your life? Do you have these kinds of people in your life? Because I'll tell you what, every one of us wants them, don't we? But it doesn't happen by accident. These friendships don't happen by accident. It takes intentionality. It happens on purpose. It's always been amazing to me that people will be so intentional. They'll research and think hours, researching a doctor that they might want to go see, or researching the school that they want to move to when their kids are growing up to get in that district or whatever. Or, I don't know if you guys are like me, I will research to death some big purchase that I'm going to make, right? Reading reviews, consumer reports, right? It's like I do this, I need a staff to go research it for me, right? Before I make this purchase. I will be intentional about a DVD player, but I will very casually I won't even think about who I'm hanging out with. What would it mean to be intentional about those kinds of friends? Putting ourselves in places where we'll meet the kind of people that we can grow tall beside, whose roots could grow in with ours and allow us to endure in ways we never thought we could endure, grow in ways we never thought we could grow. Who are those people for you? Now, one last little thing. Because I don't want us to walk out of here thinking, oh, I need those people. What's wrong with people that they're not like? Can I say, ultimately, there will be no person who will satisfy all this for you. To put that expectation on them is unrealistic. I have friends. They're so bitter because all they can ever think about is how people haven't been what they wanted them to be. Can I tell you, if you expect people to be Jesus, you will live a cynical, bitter life. Because they aren't Jesus. There's that beautiful proverb in Proverbs 18, a sort of foreshadowing, where it says, there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. It's a reference ultimately to who Jesus is, who himself says, I don't call you servants, I call you friends. And a man has no greater love than to lay down his life for his friends, he says. Because in Jesus we have a friend who reconciles, who endures, one who heals, one who could be counted on, an encourager, that kind of friend. People will never ultimately do that for you. Only Jesus can. So why not call him your friend? Why not take steps to get to know him just as you would other people? This is the reason we do so much of what we do. From the activities, the small groups, all that stuff. It's not because we just think people have too much free time on their hands. It's because we want to help create environments where you become rooted not only with other people that can help you grow, but ultimately be rooted in Jesus. That's why things like community camp, that's why I'm wearing this shirt. I love community camp. This has been a fixture of our experience here for the last 6 years. Every summer, my family and I, we get up there and we have a blast. My kids look forward to it more than anything else that we do. It's up in Kashmir, which is between Leavenworth and Wenatchee, and days on the lake with boats and water parks and whitewater, all kinds of different activities. And we're set up out in the courtyard. You can come out and find out more about that. It's one thing to get to know people in the lobby. It's another thing to sit with them at a campfire, or to ride with them in a boat, or to sit together watching fireworks on 4th of July in Wenatchee, the park, playing volleyball together. That's where you begin to find those roots. And whatever your age, whatever your stage of life, we'd love to have you. Or this summer, these summer connections. There's golfing, hiking, other activities. You have to sit in the living room and talk about your feelings. It's all right. Go out and do stuff. You begin to get to know people. To be this kind of friend and find these kinds of friends. So let me pray for that for you, and I want to pray for that right now. Let's pray together. Oh God, I thank you for this promise that there is one who sticks closer than a brother. The kind of friend that ultimately is everything, and that's Jesus. And so I thank you for that, Father, and I pray that you'll deepen us, not just in this Rooted series, but through the summer as we continue to learn and grow, but that you'll also, Lord, weave our lives in together with others to allow us to endure, to allow us to grow in ways that defy explanation. I thank you for these friends. And God, I mean this sincerely. This isn't just where I work. This is my church. This is my family. We live far away from family. They're all back east. And the relationships you've given us in this church family, they've been what sustain us. And I thank you for that, God. I pray you'll continue to deepen those roots as we together figure out what it means to follow you. God, I pray your blessing on each person here, and I especially thank you for the dads. I thank you for the men who take seriously this responsibility, who play such a key role in so many ways in our lives. And I pray you'll bless them. Give them stamina and satisfaction in their own lives and ministries as fathers. Give them tenacity to keep going when our world sometimes pushes in other ways. We're grateful. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.